Okay, good morning, everybody. So welcome to this morning's webinar. I'm going to try and buy ourselves a few minutes here just to wait for the room to kind of fill up. I think we had a good amount of attendees that are registered, so a good level of interest around this topic clearly. So I think there's about sort of 50 odd people that have been registered on. So yeah, good morning to you all, wherever it is you're dialing in from. So just a huge thank you first and foremost to David and to James. So David and James, both employment partners over at Mills Reeve, and this is the third in the series of our Furlough webinars that have been put together. So a massive thank you to the both of you. Just having a conversation with James while David was having his second breakfast before going on air, and talking about the next series of webinars that we may well be doing. So we'll be looking at getting some topics together. So this is where we want some real engagement from everybody. So please give us your feedback. Let us know what it is that you're wanting to hear about, because we're keen to shape and mould the content of our webinars and future webinars around you and what the challenges look like right now. So in reference to today's, the furlough scheme, I don't think anybody's doubting that it's been an incredible scheme that we've taken advantage of as UK businesses. Yeah, we've utilised the scheme ourselves, and now we're looking at analysing the marketplace as to when we can start drip feeding back in from furlough to actually working for us again. So we're a business and have a small amount of employees in the grand scheme of things, you know, sort of 90, 95 employees to take care of. You know, there's some companies out there, of course, and I'm sure a few on the call that have got huge workforces that are taking advantage of the scheme and have got some challenges here ahead of them. So we're hoping today that we're going to be talking about the kind of what next as well and how we can be preparing for that. So just having a look at the numbers that have come through. So I think what we'll do is I'll just give you a very short sort of whistle-stop tour on us, really. So we are the One Group. I'm Mark Kent. I head up commercial for the group. So we are a recruitment business, you know, but today is not us pitching about what we do. The recruitment market has clearly been hit extremely hard by the crisis going on. And actually, I think a lot of the recovery of the recruitment marketplace is going to be depending upon furlough and what the decisions made on bringing people back through into the workforce, what the structures are going to look like, and then ultimately that will have a direct impact on the recruitment market towards the end of the year. It hasn't been completely dead though. You know, there have been opportunities out there. There still are people moving. There still is a degree of confidence when talking to sort of clients at the moment. But of course there is the huge unknown. And I think a lot of this does filter through furlough and what decisions are made. So what we'll do is I'll hand you over to both David and to James, and we can go on with today's content. So if I just, I'll mute and get rid of my video and I'll hand over to you guys.
Brilliant, thank you, Mark. Good to see everybody again. Some people may have done some hubs with Mills Reeve this week. If you have, you probably want to tune out actually, because we're going to talk about some similar things. I know people haven't got their video on. James, do you want to tell that little story about what happened at one of our hubs this week?
Thanks for telling me that I was going to do that. So fortunately it wasn't the one I did on Tuesday, it was one of our other offices, and they had an attendee who left their video on but needed to answer the call of nature and decided to take the laptop with them to the loo, and I think was on mute, but certainly the video was on. It beggars belief how people's dedication to hearing our pearls of wisdom, David, are. So, you know, that's
so yeah, just a little anecdote there. So James, if we change the slides. So we last all got together on the 6th of May. So quite a bit's happened since then. So obviously furlough scheme's been extended from June to end of October. We've had a gradual easing of the lockdown. James is going to set the scene on that a little bit later. We've all had, and I'm sure all been reading for our sectors, the guidance produced by the government for return to work, and we've all been grappling with that. And then obviously, hot off the press, Friday night, 12th of June, we had the further details published with regard to the flexible furlough scheme. We're going to concentrate on that today, not the other issues. There's plenty to talk about. So we're going to look in detail at that scheme, but also the longer term consequences, not only of applying the scheme, but also of the scheme itself coming to an end. So plenty to get stuck in.
David's freezing a bit. His video is frozen, and his audio seems to have gone. So I'll just pick up on housekeeping. So there is a recording available, should be from the one group. It says on the slide that you should ask us questions in the chat box. Can I say actually use the Q&A, and we can be picking up the Q&A, and that would be really helpful. And the next point is answer our polls. So actually, I'd really like you to answer our first poll. No, that will be in a minute. So let's talk instead about return to a workplace. That was smoothly done, wasn't it? So,
am I back?
You're back. I was filling for you because you just had that frozen.
Hey. Well, sorry, where do we get to?
I've done your bit.
Oh, fine. You carry on then.
Thanks. So, well, unless you want to put into context a bit more where we are, or are you happy for me to just?
Where did I unfreeze or freeze? Sorry.
You froze in just really talking about what we were going to cover today. You didn't get into the context of too much of the flexible scheme. So I think we should pick up and carry on. You carry on. Yeah. So guys, you'll know much of what's on this slide. Some of your kids would have gone back to school. Some of you will have seen the queues of people outside Primark and other businesses on Monday. Let's hope that doesn't cause a second wave. And Independence Day, doesn't it, coming up, that we'll see actually far more businesses opening. But I think we have to remember that the government's guidance here is all about, if you can work from home, work from home. If you can't work from home, look at your risk assessment, consult with your employees and any trade unions on that, and then share that risk assessment. And then, of course, do your social distancing at work. So in Mills Reeve offices, we've got the one-way system all completely mapped out. We've got huge numbers of hand sanitizers for those people who need to go into the office. And we're predicting, well, who knows when we'll all be back. And I don't think we'll be doing these types of events live in front of an audience for a very long period of time. So making use of the technology in the meantime. And, you know, in the meantime, social distancing all the way. Okay. So overview of flexible furlough, David.
Yeah, apologies for disappearing. I have no idea what happened there. I was fighting with my son to get him off his Xbox earlier, so that might have had something to do with it. So just a quick overview before we look at the detail. So the new rules on flexible furlough. So there's a cut-off date. So the 1st of July, you can't put any new people on furlough as from the 1st of July. And actually, what we'll look at later, it's actually an earlier date. It's actually from the 10th of June. We'll explain why. So the big news, and so up to this point and until the end of June, anybody, as you know, who is on furlough cannot do any work. Okay, that's absolutely clear. They cannot do any work at all. But with the new scheme, for people who are on furlough, you can choose to bring them back and do some part-time work. Okay. For the work that they do, they will be paid at their normal rate of pay. And for the remainder of the time that they are on furlough, they will receive a proportionate reduced grant from the government. Okay. So a huge amount of flexibility. We're going to have a look at how that works in more detail later. Well, the government has also said is that there's a cap on the number of people that you can claim for. So previously you may put a claim in for 20 people or 30 people or 50 people. From the 1st of July, if previously the maximum was 50 people, that's the maximum you can claim for at any one time. Okay, so what we think the government's trying to do, and you may have read about the article about fraud this morning. James, when I was off, you didn't mention this, presumably.
I was about to want you to do it. Yeah, you may have read the chief exec of HMRC is going to come down hard on businesses who've fraudulently been using the scheme. They've had employees, over 3,000 reports already of where they've been furloughed but then told by their employers to work. That will be a criminal offence, up to 10 years in prison for directors who've done that. And we've said all along in all of these seminars that the revenue will, to some degree, examine in the future
what people have claimed and was it accurate, and if they don't think it's accurate, they may look for some money back. They've already spent £20 billion on this, and we've still got months to go. And the cap on the numbers, I think, is designed. There could be some employers out there who just have people part-time working at the moment and suddenly think, oh, part-time, we could actually we can get some grant for those people, but you can't. Okay, so to claim to benefit from flexible furlough, people have to have been registered before the 1st of July. It's worth probably just saying at this point as well is that there's no obligation on you to use flexible furlough. So you could just choose to keep people furloughed doing no work, okay, between now and the end of October if you so wish. But this gives you the opportunity, and it's all designed for hopefully kickstarting the economy and actually hoping that businesses will have more work, so gradually bringing employees who are on furlough back to work. And it's also taking into account that clearly the economy is not going to have recovered by the end of October. And then finally on this slide, and this is very, very important as well. So obviously, as we know, people on furlough at the moment, you can claim from the government the grants, so the 80% of wages capped at 2,500 plus NI and pension contributions. As from the 1st of August, you as employers are going to have to start picking some of that up, and there's going to be a progressive contribution from you and a tapered payment from the government, and we'll look at that in detail a little later.
Well, do you want me to skip over and go to that slide now and just talk through it?
No, we'll come back to that. Why don't we do the first poll?
Okie dokie. So this is we're talking about the flexible furlough scheme. Please don't abbreviate it to FFS. We know what some of you might think that stands for, so we'll let you think about that. So this is our first poll. Do you plan to use the flexible furlough scheme? Please vote now. So the other stat that I saw while everyone is thinking about that is, was it quarter of the nation's workforce was on furlough? That is a huge number. And the other stat, was it end of last week or this week, that said that 600,000 people had come off PAYE, come off the payroll already since we started this. I don't think that will be the end, as we will look at later. Okay, 24 of 30 of you, 80% of you have voted. I'm going to assume that that's it. So I'm going to share with you. So wow, 3/4 of you plan to use the flexible furlough scheme. I kind of treat that as I think that's a positive, really, that actually you've got work, that you think that you've got employees that you can come back and give them, and therefore share some of the costs with the government. Okay, so we're back to the tapered payments.
No, I think that's right, James. I see that's very encouraging, actually. So as I said, so these tapered, so the table sets out just very neatly what's going to happen from the 1st of August. So the 1st of August, where you've got employees on furlough, you, the employer, are going to start picking up the NI contributions, pension contributions. Government will still pay 80% of wages. September, in addition to NI pension contributions, you're then picking up 10% of the capped amount. The government goes down to 70%. And then that goes up to 20% in October, and the government down to 60%. And then obviously at the end of October, the scheme ends. So if you're not thinking about it already, that raises quite a few issues to start thinking about. So if you're in a position where you feel that you can keep employees furloughed or flexibly furloughed until the end of the scheme, what happens at that point? So clearly the economy will not have recovered fully by the end of October. So as a business, the question is, can you then bring all those furloughed employees back to work and work on 100%? That would be great if you could. Clearly that's not going to be the case for everybody. So you could be also left with a situation that where you then say to your workforce, there still isn't enough work, and so you go through a normal procedure, proposal, consult with a view to getting their agreement for potentially to work reduced hours, reduced pay, and you've no longer got any money from the government. That might be an option. But ultimately, the issue might be that actually there isn't enough work at that point. So you have to consider, unfortunately, redundancies. And we know for a fact that a lot of people, you've seen in the press, huge amounts of redundancies at the moment. You're entitled, as we said before, to make people redundant whilst they are on furlough. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail later. But if financially you cannot afford to keep people on your books from this point onwards, or for any point during the furlough, the one benefit, if you have to go down the redundancy route, is that if you issue notice, then you will be able to still recover a proportionate amount of grants from the government. And again, we'll talk about that in more detail later. But the reality is, this timetable is going to make it more expensive for employers with people on furlough. I know I've spoken to a number of businesses that are saying that as from September, they're not going to be able to afford to pay the 10% than the 20%. Okay, but as I say, we'll come back to that a little bit later. James.
It all depends on your activity levels, I guess, and what income you're coming through. But yeah, a lot of the clients that I've looked at will say, actually, there were some redundancies we might have made anyway. Let's take advantage of the scheme if they were on furlough. So lots of pressure there. What's your view, David, before we move on the extension of the scheme beyond the end of October?
It's not going to happen. I
agree. I think this is it. I think the government is costing too much money.
It's too expensive, and even with this, even with the tapered provision, well, it's not so much tapered provision with the fact that you can flexibly bring people back. I just don't think there's enough work in the economy for everybody, and the government just clearly can't afford it. So actually, the cost of furlough throughout the next few months up to the end of October is still going to be high. It's not magically going to come down a huge amount.
Agreed. I mean, some employers may just say, well, we can't flexibly furlough, so we're just going to keep people on furlough, and you're entitled to do that. So yeah. Okay, second poll, people. This is about ending furlough. So do you intend to bring employees back from furlough at the point the government grant starts to reduce? So with effect from the 1st of August, please vote now. It's a very large flagon of orange juice you've got there, Mr. Mills.
Not as big as my cooled water.
Very good. Yeah, I've got the Bear Grylls Never Give Up flask, which obviously inspires me during the day.
Is that when you go foraging in your garden for grubs?
Oh, look, there's a nice maggot. Lovely. Yes. I watched a bit of Bear Grylls with my kids, and they just hide behind the sofa most of the time. Okay, 77% of you have voted. Thank you very much. So here are the results. So 63% of you said yes. So the vast majority-ish will be bringing employees back at the point it's going to start costing you money. I suspect if I really ran that and said, how's that going to affect your plans from the 1st of September and the 1st of October, the percentage of bringing people back will go up. Okay, so David.
I was just going to say, actually, nobody's chatting to us at the moment. So just a reminder, if you've got some questions, please pull those through, and we'll be picking those up.
Through the Q&A, not through the chat, please.
I still can't see any.
I didn't say there were any. I'm just saying direct them through the Q&A.
Yeah. No. So
they're listening, David. They're not typing.
So would encourage you to do that. So just a bit more detail then on what I looked at earlier. So we have this cut-off date from the 1st of July. You cannot bring people onto furlough who haven't been furloughed before. And you'll remember, currently, to be on furlough, you have to be on furlough for a minimum 3-week period. So actually, the real date to bring people onto the furlough scheme was the 10th of June. So if you haven't done it, unfortunately, you can't bring new people on anymore, with some exceptions that we'll talk about in the minute. Yeah, and a couple of numbers is quite interesting. As I said before. So some of the exceptions. So if, for example, you during this period buy a business and you're therefore getting employees joining you under TUPE, if some of those employees have previously been on furlough before the 10th of June, then you can take them on to furlough. Okay. If anybody does do a TUPE, be aware that there is an exception to that. I'm not going to go into any detail today, but there's a category of TUPE in relation to service provision changes that technically doesn't qualify. Okay, so just bear that in mind, and we can provide more detail if necessary. And payroll consolidation is another exception, although I suspect that's probably unlikely in practice. James, you've got some other exceptions.
Well, the other one is the government responded to a bit of outcry and said, hang on a minute, what about somebody returning from, we call it statutory leave, so as you see the full list here, adoption, maternity, paternity, all of that. There are some specific eligibility requirements, which I am going to look at because I haven't got them in my short-term memory. So you can furlough them even if it's for the first time, provided one, you've claimed for another employee, not them, between 1st March and 30th of June for at least 3 weeks, which kind of makes sense. 2, the statutory leave for that person started before the 10th of June and they returned after then the 10th of June. They were on the payroll on the 19th of March, the usual eligibility requirement for the payroll for the furlough scheme. And then if you meet those 3 eligibility criteria, the cap on numbers is increased. So going back to David's slide, so if our cap on numbers of people furloughed at any 1 3-week period before the 10th of June was 100, and then you have a woman on maternity leave who comes back, then you can have your numbers increased to 101 as a result. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You just got to make sure you hit those eligibility criteria. Okay, total flexibility, David.
Total flexibility. And we've had our first question, which is perfect timing. I will deal with it on this slide. So with the new flexible furlough, it is completely flexible. So it is entirely your gift to work out what kind of work, levels of work that you want to offer employees on furlough. And from the 1st of July, that 3-week minimum period disappears. So there is no minimum period. So if you've got somebody who normally works 40 hours a week, and you think actually you've got 50% of work for them, they could do 50% of work in a week, and they could remain for the other 50% on furlough. But actually, they could do a Monday on furlough, a Tuesday at work. They could you could have them on furlough for 35 of those hours, and they could do 5 hours work. I mean, it is completely within your gift. So the question was, are there any minimum percentages for bringing people back part-time? Absolutely not. Now, the really important thing, and we've talked about this in the previous 2 webinars, is that employment law still applies here. Okay, and what you're doing is changing somebody's terms and conditions of employment. So what you're doing is you are proposing an arrangement to somebody, you're discussing that with them with a view to obtaining their consent. And we've talked quite a bit about how the guidance and the Treasury Directive have dealt with those issues. The situation is broadly the same, in that what the guidance says is you need the employee's agreement to the new pattern, okay? And it must be documented. So our advice is that you send out a new furlough letter to people that you are putting onto flexible furlough. And it could be that you have to send a new letter each week because the pattern's going to change. If you're clear about the pattern going forward, you'll only need 1 letter. But it could also be that the letter just agrees with the employee that it's going to be completely flexible, and it could change on a daily stroke weekly basis. And what you want to build into that letter is that it could be on short notice that you want them to do some work. But that you have to document that with a letter. the employee has to agree. Technically, the employee doesn't have to sort of sign and return the letter. Our view, though, has always been and still is that preferably you should get the employee just to reply electronically and say, yep, happy with that, or as a text, say they're happy with that arrangement. And nothing's changed in the respect that you then keep those letters for 5 years. And the new rule is that you also have to keep the detailed records of the hours spent working and the hours on furlough. So make sure that is all documented safely. Okay.
Just on that, David, so I mean, how many issues have we had and dealt with over the years that people have the same conversation and come away with two different understandings? So David, will you agree to work flexibly and I can just give you an hour's notice to come in when I need you? You say yes. I was waiting for you to say yes, but thank you for that. You say yes to that, and I
was
write
thinking about it. Consultation, yeah. I thought about it, and yes.
Great. I write you a letter that says we've agreed to this, and this, and ideally that's it. That's the end of the story, isn't it? And because I have properly documented. But if all I just say is you've agreed to work flexibly, and I haven't detailed the pattern or the maximum flexibility that I am seeking from you, what has David actually agreed to, because it's not set out. So I think there's a point about how much detail you put into your letter, and B, what actually did they agree to? So as David says, ideally we would seek a response to the letter. The downside of that, of course, is that why do you need to seek a response if you've already got the agreement and you have properly documented it? And if actually seeking the response means more admin and more headaches for you, then query whether, and if you've got great numbers, how you need to balance admin and ideal position. I think there's a bit of an exercise there. Okay. Thanks for this slide, David. I got the one that involves numbers. So I thought about
fun slide, James.
This is the fun slide, absolutely. And actually, in prepping for today, I wasn't going to touch any of the numbers at all. And having worked it through and got it straight in my head, unless you're going to shout me down, I am going to do a worked example, because actually it illustrated for me how this works. But in broad terms, you're going to pay somebody as normal for the hours they work, and then you're going to claim through the furlough scheme for the hours they don't work whilst they remain on furlough, and the cap still applies to those furlough hours. There is, I thought, some very complicated worked examples on the government coronavirus website pages, which I have to say I found very difficult to follow. There is a link where you can, it's like calculating statutory redundancy, you can put the details in and it will apply it. There is the onus on you to get this right, and you shouldn't be making a claim until you are certain how many hours that the employee has actually worked. So don't claim for how many hours you think they're going to work in a week, you claim for how many hours they've actually worked in a week. But the sum itself is relatively simple. So you divide the full furlough grant. So let's assume that's 2,500 for a month. We'll go back to what that is for a week. Divide that by the normal hours worked, multiply it by the hours remaining on furlough. So, hey, that's simple, isn't it? So I thought actually I might illustrate that with an example. So if we get lost in the weeds at this point, David will say, well, James, you've gone on mute, or hopefully it will be very simple, okay? So let's take an example of somebody who earns £52,000 a year. So if they earn £52,000 a year, that's £1,000 a week. And let's use the example of 40 hours a week. If that's the case, then they are going to earn £500 in that week because they've worked half the week. Now, if we apply in flexible furlough scheme, £1,000 a week will be capped, wouldn't it? So a cap on that with a weekly sum is, trust me, £576. Divide that by 40, so divide the full furlough grant, which is our £576, by the normal hours worked, which is our 40, gives you £14.42, times it by the actual hours on furlough, 288. So you'd pay £500 for the normal hours worked, you pay 288, which is the cap sum Obviously, you can top up if you want to, but you don't have to, as we've always said. So I'm not going to go any further than that. That's a brief illustration of how the cap would work. Obviously, huge numbers of variations in that, and if they've got variable hours, but that's the principal basic calculation. Look at the government website for more details if you need to. I hope that wasn't too complicated.
Not too many people dropped off, James.
What, asleep or dropped off the webinar?
Number of participants.
Yeah, I know.
A few cups of tea may be made. Good. Okay. So just on to the next slide, and this is really important. And as we said throughout all of our webinars, and I mentioned earlier, employment law stays the same. Okay. And all sorts of considerations for using the flexible scheme, and then potentially thinking about redundancies apply here. So just looking at discrimination, so we still need to be careful. So if you are deciding that you want to use the flexible scheme, and it may be that you're not bringing everybody on furlough back to do some part-time work, so how are you deciding which people that you apply that to? And then actually, for those people that you are bringing back on a part-time basis, how you allocate hours to them, just bear in mind, as always, as you would always do, not to make sure that by intention or by accident that you are discriminating against people. And obviously we want to avoid grievances from people saying, well, hold it, why haven't I been given some part-time work, or why am I getting less part-time work than some of the other people? Because the upshot of James's calculation is that if you do some part-time work on flexible furlough, you get more money in your pocket. Okay, yeah. So bear that in mind. And we're going to come on to this, we want to start thinking about putting people on redundancy. How do you calculate their statutory redundancy payment if they've got 2 years service? Important to bear in mind that you remember with statutory redundancy is based on age, length of service, gross weekly pay, which is capped. The gross weekly pay is on their pre-COVID normal salary, okay, not on the one that applies during furlough or flexible furlough, okay. Holiday rights have only, the principle is the same with flexible furlough. So as we've explained before, during furlough, annual leave accrues, and what you have to do as an employer, you can take the benefit of the grant, but you have to top up to 100% of normal salary, okay. So actually, if you use flexible furlough, you'll be getting less money from the government, and obviously, effectively, you'll be topping up more, okay, but the same principle applies. And then the really interesting one we've had lots of conversations with clients about is that if you decide to make people redundant during furlough, and I would emphasise you can do that, because we're asked all the time, surely we can't make people redundant whilst on furlough. You can. If you make people redundant, then if you issue them with notice, what do you have to pay? Now, as James mentioned before, you could have, obviously, if you issue people with notice during furlough, you can then have the benefit of claiming some of the grants from the government. Our view is, though, that if you are, somebody is on notice, that actually you should then be topping up to 100% of pay. There are counter arguments to that, because what some people say is, well, if they're on furlough, surely they should only receive the amount of money that they're based on furlough. There are some quite technical legal arguments that we're not even going to go into today, but if people are interested because they can't afford to pay full pay, then speak to us. But there are some legal arguments where in certain circumstances, and not for everybody, that you might be able to get away with only paying the furlough amount, the grant from the government. And that, having said that, though, it's still a risk, and it hasn't been tested in the courts. And there's a moral issue to some extent, that with people on furlough, if they were to only receive the grant during notice, and you were making people redundant at the same time who are not on furlough, who receive full pay for that period, arguably that seems a little inequitable. So our advice is, if you can afford to, it is better to overall. The other thing to bear two other things to bear in mind with notice is that if you decide to pay in lieu, which a lot of people do, you can't claim the grant for that. Okay, that is your choice to pay in lieu, so you have to pay at 100%. And indeed, if you were to place somebody on garden leave, you can't claim the furlough amount. Okay, so lots of things to bear in mind, and we'll perhaps talk about towards the end, a little bit more, or next actually, a little bit more about redundancies or the practicalities of that. But any questions on that, let us know.
Well, you answered Sharon's question as she was typing it on garden leave, so well done. I know. I was waiting for you to deal with the garden leave point, and you did it seamlessly, so thank you very much. Rosie, I will deal with Rosie's question now, which is about, have we heard anything on shielding? So a lot of people got a letter that said you are shielding and therefore they were on the furlough scheme. A lot of people now should have got letters to say you're no longer shielding. So in theory, they could return, and that, in which case, then actually they could fall within the scheme. They might be one of those people that, in theory, might be what we call a reluctant returner. So we say we've done the risk assessment, actually we can't remove all risks, but we've reduced the risks so that you can come back. If actually they are unwilling to do so, and that is a problem for you because you've got work and you need people to do it, then, as we'll come on to in a minute, that could be problematic, and you might end up with not paying them because actually they're under a duty to come to work and they're not coming to work. I think it will depend upon the nature of the shielding, the nature of how much you need them at work, and how, for want of a better term, aggressive you want to be with certain individuals, or whether actually you could leave them on furlough and take a lighter touch, perhaps. Okay, longer term planning. So we've touched on some of this already, but so in a situation where we're making lots of redundancies here, there, and everywhere, we've got, as we've set out, costs going up from the 1st of August. I'm sure most of you who are HR professionals embedded in businesses are already thinking, hang on a minute, timing wise, what do I need to work back from when the costs are going to start hurting the business? So is that the 1st of August with just pension and NI? Is that the 1st of September with the 10%, or is that the 1st of October with the 20%? So working back from that, how many redundancies? Is collective consultation engaged? I'll very briefly bore you with the definition of collective consultation. Are you proposing to dismiss 20 or more employees at one establishment within a period of 90 days? Remember, establishment is the site. So the Woolworths case from a few years ago. Remember Woolworths, everybody? Get your pick and mix. That is very helpful that it is the site. So if you've got many sites, they are different establishments, and it's per legal entity. So if you have a number of companies in the group, you're looking at the numbers per legal entity. So working back, if you want to do it from the 1st of August, you need to, and your numbers are such that you've got 100 redundancies you're planning, then you need to be working back at least 45 days before that, which is what, about now, if not earlier, to think about how I am going to make sure that I have got the collective consultation done. Obviously, a collective consultation isn't the whole picture. You also need to think about individual consultation, and then people working, in inverted commas, their notice periods if you want to take advantage of the offset of the grant, as David has just talked about, not paying in lieu and not using garden leave. So all of that works. Moral issue is, some people may say, as David mentioned, why are you making me redundant now? You should just leave me on the furlough scheme. Well, it's going to cost us money with effect from the 1st of August. It's going to cost us more money, September and October. So I think there's a moral pressure. As David says, legally you can do it. So you need to work out, actually, is this right for the business? What's income? What activity levels? When are we going to do this? And plan accordingly. I do think there's a real issue of, I've lost my train of thought for a moment.
Can I just add something there, James?
Yeah.
Just on the, we're dealing with this all the time, but you remember for unfair dismissal purposes, where people got 2 years employment, then redundancy tribunals want to ensure that redundancy is the last resort. So you've looked at all absolute other avenues before you get to that point. So, no agency workers, no recruitment, etc., etc. So the as James said, the obvious question, the first question you're going to get in a consultation is, well, as an alternative, just keep me on furlough to the end of October. So it is very important that you have put together your reasoning, and you need a very clear reason to make people redundant anyway, but you have your financial planning and evidence in place, which says we have modelled this, and we are only proposing this at this point because we've modelled keeping people on furlough for the next few months, the end of October, and it just doesn't work, and we just haven't got enough work now. We won't have enough work, and the next 6 months, part of the planning, there's no way that there's going to be enough work. So that's why we got to this point. So it's going to be the first thing you're asked, and you just need to be ready for that.
Agreed. I remember what it was I was going to say, which is about how do you conduct collective consultation with perhaps a mixture of some people at work, or some people on furlough, or all of the people that you need to make redundant on furlough. And just on that, and picking up on one of David's points, which is, just because people are on furlough, that doesn't mean they're the ones that you're automatically going to select for redundancy. I think you need to be looking at selection pools and obviously applying objective selection criteria in the way that you ordinarily would, rather than just assuming, well, you're furloughed, therefore you're 1 foot out the door. I think collective consultation is possible during furlough, but carries the usual challenging issues about actually how do you engage with employees? Have you got the ability to talk to people, whether that's via email? Have you got to resort to post? Remember that people? So you can do it. We know that a rep can be on furlough and still operate as a rep, so that is entirely possible, and people can be on furlough and come to meetings which are consultation meetings. So all of that is doable, but obviously people aren't going to be that excited, let's be frank, about coming to a redundancy consultation meeting because it's bad news, isn't it? But nonetheless, you've just got to work out how you're going to do it. So that's the negative bit. The other part of this slide is about roles that are sustainable. So will the part-time working work going through using the flexible furlough scheme? David mentioned it previously. We've looked at this before in terms of actually, can I say to people, I can't employ you on a full-time basis, but how about we do it on a 0.8 basis? So you work 4 days a week instead of 5, and I pay you 4 days. So I pay you 80% of your normal pay, or variations thereof. Documenting that with proper consent on that might be a way forward. It's, we're in a different world now, aren't we? So actually, how do we operate matching activity levels with what our expectations are with employees? When are we going to come out of the recession? Is it going to be a V-shaped recession? All of that stuff. Very difficult planning, I know, going forward. Okay, so third poll, if you'd be so kind. You heard me talking about this. So have you started consulting about potential redundancy? So we did have a real surge before the scheme was extended to the end of October, where people were going, right, we need to deal with a collective consultation. Now that then dropped off a bit as when it got extended, and then we are, I think, seeing a real surge now where people are sorting their houses out, if you see what I mean. Okay, that's a good showing. 77% of you have voted, so I'm going to show you the results. So no, many of you, the vast majority, 90% of you, have not started consulting about potential redundancies. I'm going to, as we had before, David, I'm going to see that as a positive news. That doesn't mean they're not coming down the track, but actually you haven't yet. So that's really good. Okay.
Just some of the other questions I think is that we received previously, just to pick up on some of those points. It's quite interesting with collective, because collective consultation seems to have a negative connotation and people seem very reluctant to use it, which I understand is primarily about the minimum periods of consultation, so 20 or more, 30 days, 100 more, 45 days minimum period of consultation. But I always like to emphasize that it is also very positive in a number of respects. Legally, you obviously, in most cases, will elect representatives, and then you will be consulting with those representatives. Everything with collective is with a view to reaching agreements. You have an open mind, and it's more akin to a negotiation, but ultimately it's your gift on how matters proceed. But the positives from a legal perspective, as part of that consultation, you will invariably agree with the representatives, the pools. You'll invariably agree the selection matrix that you're going to use and the methodology around the marking. And invariably, in large collectives, you will not have the capacity to consult individually with everybody in a pool, and you prefer just to consult with those provisionally selected, so those are below the line in the marking. And again, that is a philosophy which you can agree with the reps. If you agree issues such as that, then you consult with those individuals and you generally follow a fair process. In our experience, on a practical perspective, very rare that anybody brings a claim, and if they do bring a claim, you're in a very strong position to defend it. Okay, so there are all sorts of positives for going through it. If you are just we have people who sort of just go over, hit 20 or 21 and want to try and avoid it. That is a risk in the current circumstances. Obviously, you have to put in an HR1 form to the government. It's a criminal offence if you don't do that. But more importantly, we have discussed this before. We are in unprecedented times. We're in a completely different environment at the moment, which means that when we come out of furlough, it's very unlikely that people are going to be able to get jobs. And as we know, if people can't get jobs and they are dismissed, they are much more likely to bring a claim because in theory they have nothing to lose. And so it is about getting the procedure right. And we think there's going to be a huge wave of claims for people who might not normally bring claims, but because they will have no other alternative, which we're going to see in 6 months, a year down the line. And the thing with collective, as you know, is that if you get it wrong, then there is a protective award of up to 90 days pay for each employee, which is not capped. If you're talking about large numbers, that is a big number, let alone unfair dismissal remedies, etc., and breach of contract claims. So very, very important to get that right. So do spend some time, clear time planning.
Can I pick up one point related to that, which is about, you mentioned the 30 and 45 days collective consultation. That's the test of that is before the first of the dismissals takes effect. Our experience is actually most people are pragmatic in collective consultations, and reps will sign off on the big picture, which is we need to make the redundancies, or historically we need to close this site. And you might continue consultation on some of the smaller issues, but that enables you to start the individual consultation earlier than dragging it out potentially for 45 days or 30 days, depending on the numbers. So you can reduce the overall time, provided you've done the collective consultation is site. And if you want to move earlier into individual than the end of the 30 or 45s, then the reps, you want to get the reps to have formally signed off on that, which is great. And if they do so, you get into individual, and you can give notice. You give notice during those 30 or 45 day periods, provided the notice doesn't take effect earlier than the 45 or 30 day periods. That's your key bit. So you can shorten the process, provided the reps accommodate you. Sometimes we'd look at it as being, well, that's reps being like turkeys and voting for Christmas, because by agreeing to shorten the process, they are, in theory, doing the employees out of pay, because you are reducing the time before notice takes effect. Most people are professional, though, and I have to say, don't want to just extend it for the sake of it. Sorry, David, you were about to say?
Well, no, so fine. So just some of the other questions that people sent in that we can pick up upon. There's one about how can we manage furlough positively. At first it was okay, it's now of great concern, and obviously there remains a lot of sensitivity with people on furlough and people concerned about their jobs. Things that work very well are, ongoing efforts around mental health and supporting staff, not just on furlough but from working from home, and communication I always think is key in these kind of situations. If people on furlough feel that they're out of sight and out of mind, then they are going to be much more concerned about matters, and just regular communication I think will assist. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, James.
I'd agree with that. Get levels of engagement understandably going to be harder to maintain. should we move on? Just, do you want me to do the next slide, or do you want to do it?
I've just got one other question I wanted to pick up.
Sure.
And then I can look at the next one. And this is a good question about future planning. Questions around when can we return to the office and supporting people with high risk relatives. So the number one objective is still in place. If you can work from home, you should be working from home. And I know quite a few businesses are sort of trying to sort of move around the edges of that. We as a business, everybody is working from home if they can work from home. There needs to be a bit of flexibility, we think, in respect of people who are struggling, working from home from a mental health perspective. And so we are working with people to spend some time in the office where that is the case. We think that's something sensible to do. And the position hasn't changed with respect to people's personal circumstances. And so with flexible furlough, you're still, having a positive discussion with people about, are they, if they're, so if they've got childcare responsibilities, they might not be able to do any part-time work at the moment. If they're looking after shielding or ill relatives, they might not be able to. So the position remains the same there.
Actually, we've heard evidence from people that have gone into the office because they say, actually, I can focus better than at my dining table or in my bedroom or whatever, and I need that focus of this is my workspace, and that whole blurring of work and home lives and all that sort of stuff. And actually, they say it's worse going to the office because there's nobody else there apart from a couple of facilities people, and it's really lonely, and it just reminds me of how nice it was before when other people were there. So you might want to think about a rota system and a buddy system with social distancing and all that sort of stuff. So actually, when people go in, they know that other people might be there.
And it's a big topic, but obviously when people are returning to work, you've got to carry out your risk assessment, post that on your website, consult on it to a certain degree. There are people we know from various surveys who, despite having done that, and you ask them to return to work, will be nervous about returning to work just because they're concerned. And that's going to be a big piece of communication with those people. People are rightly nervous about using public transport. That's their only way of getting to work. People at the moment aren't confident. At the end of the furlough scheme, they might be more confident. We are anticipating that the 2 metre rule will go down to a 1 metre rule in the not too distant future. So lots of issues like that just to be very, very sensitive to when you're speaking to people. Do you want to flick up the next slide, James? And I'll just briefly talk to that, where people would like some help. We are giving lots of advice, as we always do, around general redundancies, collective redundancies. We've got all sorts of interesting packs and packages that you can buy for very reasonable rates, just even if it's just template letters that you need for the whole process, of which there are quite a few, and or just general bespoke around everything. The other thing, which is actually, I've always found this very useful, having done many collective exercises over the years, is that once you've elected your reps and you've agreed who your management reps are, who are going to do the collective consultation, is actually probably on the morning of the first collective consultation meeting to have some training. So James and I will regularly go into companies, and it's giving the employee reps and the management reps a very clear picture as to what their obligations and duties and responsibilities are, and that really clears things and sets the tone in a very positive manner before you then start the actual consultation. So bear that in mind, and we can do that for you if that would be of some assistance. James.
Thank you, David. We're going to finish with the tribunal roadmap. And those of you who are dealing with tribunal claims...
That was a big sigh, James.
Yeah, but it's justified, okay? Because before we got this virus, I think we all recognise that, I won't say the tribunal system is broken, because I think that's a little harsh, but I think that the tribunal system was under pressure, under-resourced. Claims were almost back up to the same levels as we were experiencing prior to the impact of tribunal fees knocked them down. And it was difficult getting the tribunal to respond to urgent applications that we would make, and hearings were being slow to be listed. Come the virus, all of that gets worse for understandable reasons. Not many staff can come in, and not enough judges, and then you've got the same number of claims, and you get a backlog. So end of last week, the tribunal system said, well, okay, we recognise those are those problems. As you can see on the slide, this is our roadmap to try and address some of this, so that in the early months, they will be doing things, hopefully, by what they call their cloud video platform, which is presumably the government's own Zoom and platform. And then as we go through the summer, some more claims being heard as they get themselves organised, some hearings in person, which I think would be interesting with social distancing. And then we get to more claims in the autumn, and then by the end of the year they really are thinking about how this is going to work, and hopefully there is some return to normality. What we are seeing is a listing is, depending upon which tribunal area you are in, but listing is not good. And by not good I mean a 3-day claim could be listed sometime late next year, if not later. The wheels of justice grind slowly here. You can say, if the tribunal is going to list it for a video hearing, you can make recommendations as to why not, because your witnesses can't cope with that sort of stuff, for example, but the tribunal is going to be trying to drive things through to try and get through the backlog. So, and the last thing is the tribunal says, please don't contact us unless you really have to, which I guess some of us have to, because we get difficult people on the other side who are not engaging, and we need to make applications. But basically bear with the tribunal system because it's under pressure at the moment.
Well, interestingly, I had a claim come in last week in respect of a dismissal in 2014, and it was accepted by the tribunal. Interesting. So yes, the system is under a bit of pressure. One just final question from Sharon before we conclude. Thank you, Sharon. This is quite common. Individuals who think furlough is a right. It isn't a right, and actually we've been making it very clear to individuals it's not. It's a scheme which is available to employers, and it's entirely at the gift of employers. What has been effective is just reminding people that this is not only just unprecedented times, but you know, the state that the business is in, and what we're trying to do is the best thing, not just for the business, but for protecting people's jobs going forward. And we need them to work with us on that. And obviously what we're doing, and the government's trying to do, is protect jobs. And if people don't work with us on it, and are, you know, for example, we've got work for people to do, and they're saying, and they haven't got good reasons, such as shielding or childcare responsibilities, etc. And they're just, we've had lots of cases of people who've quite enjoyed the very good weather and being furloughed. If they're not playing, you know, ball with us on this, then there's only going to be possibly one consequence, which could be that we have to reduce the workforce. And so difficult, but again, it's about just reminding them that we're all in this together, and we're trying to do the best for everybody. So that probably concludes everything from us. So we're going to hand you back to Mark, and we were commenting on his very bouffant hair, which has grown very nicely over the furlough period. There he is.
Thank you, David.
It's not real, that hair, I have to say.
It's like I managed to get a giant piece of Lego and just put it on top of my head. I can interchange it. I should have done a costume change at half time, shouldn't I?
I think you can do your lunch underneath at the back, and then you can just nip it out and have a snack.
Oh, this is it. Yeah, okay, yeah. Keep all sorts of sins in there. So yeah, and on to general observations, and away from my hair. You two have got a blossoming relationship in these webinars. This is our third now, and you've got it's a beautiful marriage that's kind of forming between you. The kind of information you have between you. It's lovely. But no, huge thank you anyway. So massive thank you to both of you, and we will be looking at what we can do next from here. That's going to be relevant, and the topics that people are wanting to hear about. So please let us know those. We'll be sending some feedback On the email that we follow up with, in addition to, we'll stick contact details on there for both James and David. So if anybody has any further follow-up questions that haven't been covered, then please, by all means, channel those through to those guys. If there are any recruitment-related questions, if that's just based on the marketplace, the trends, any insights from the marketplace, this doesn't need to be, you know, giving us your jobs to recruit. So I appreciate people are going to be getting high amounts of volume from candidate inquiries at the moment anyway. But if you want some intel from the marketplace, please, by all means, just drop me a note. Kind of leads in, there were some points here raised about returning to work and having a consideration here about what that's going to be like for employees from a mental point of view, so well-being point of view, and also a psychological point of view that I think we all need to consider. So this kind of leads us quite nicely into the next set of webinars that we're doing. So next Thursday, we have motivating, engaging your employees. So this is really considering the remote working environment and then now coming back into what could be the office environment or the very new looking office environment they perhaps haven't seen before. And then also, I think 2 weeks after that, we've got one in particular with the doctor talking about the psychology of our employees, you know, what they're going to go through, how we can understand that a little bit better as well. So another couple of good ones that we'll send across to people and keep you informed. So the feedback's really important. If you guys would be able to take some time to put that feedback over to us, we can then shape any other content that we're going to put over. And indeed, I just wanted to thank you all for spending some time today, taking time out of your diaries. But again, thank you to James and to David for the 3 in the series that you've now put together. And I hope we can do some others together soon.
Pleasure.